Hello, I'm Cara, and I'm stitching a commission here, which is just says, "Are you just here to waste my fucking time?" And with some pretty little flowers around it that I'm going to work on now. And I just am would like to chat a little bit on thoughts that were all conversations that we're having about protests. Because there were the big 50501, the hands-off protests on Saturday, April 5th, protesting Trump's actions and Elon Musk's actions, that had huge turnout. But were, the organizers, the demands and the goals of those protests and the organizers are pretty vague. Like, they're huge and vague, that like need to stop Trump's stop the things he's doing to take over our democracy, which absolutely, is something that I do want done. But it's hard to know what step one is with something that large. Anyway, so I guess the first thought I have is that there are many different people have there are a lot of different takes on these protests in particular. And my feeling is that like a lot of those takes have at least some merit, right? And I'm not the only nuanced person speaking on the internet. A lot of social media does it makes it a lot harder to express nuance, or to gain any traction when you do. So I think all of us are probably seeing the least nuanced takes most often, but there are a lot of good ones out there. Oh, there goes the orange cat. She was considering coming to snuggle with me. She just got up from a nap, but I'm talking to my phone camera, so not a good snuggle partner at the moment. I think she's decided. Anyway, but the other thing that I've been thinking about, that all of our many takes on the protests is part of, is trying to think about myself and ourselves as American citizens, and realizing that we have also been victims of this huge, I guess propaganda machine is the best way to that I can think to express it, but just these huge campaigns. Like, it's very, a lot of people that I talk to are aware of at least the general vibe of the awful things that the CIA did, overthrowing any kind of left-leaning movement in a lot of foreign countries, either because we wanted to sell things there, because we just wanted power there, because we had a company, like United Fruit that wanted to monopolize, like completely extract as much profit as they could out of a place without having any pushback from the people they were oppressing. We're aware of that. I'm aware of, things like the assassination of Fred Hampton, and the way that Black Panthers and Black leaders in the civil rights movement, leaders in general, but especially Black leaders, were targeted as like the number one danger to the state by people like the FBI. So I'm aware of that, those two or these array of like very extreme levels of reaction or levels of action taken by our at least parts of our government, pieces of our government. And I think part of it too is like, I read a book a long time ago. I have it called Legacy of Ashes. This red one over here about the CIA, the history of the CIA. And referring it to as Legacy of Ashes was actually Eisenhower, who was one of the first presidents under which the CIA existed. He was very pro a lot of the things they did, but also concerned about the possible impact that he might be having on history, at least sometimes. Hey, bud. This is Jillian Owens. She's very cute. How are you, sweetheart? You very cute. You think it's time to eat? That's an interesting theory. I think you can wait a few more minutes. Okay. This is a cat. But even as I become aware of that, it can be hard. I feel like our identity as Americans, this kind of built up in order to perpetuate a lot of the worst thing, the things that I dislike the most about America and about what we do. I feel like that identity still is built up very deeply. Like there's multiple layers, So it isn't just... Anyway, so like one thing that you think of, like I've heard people laugh about meeting Americans and hearing us talk about the Vietnam War, especially those of us who haven't re-examined our understanding of it since going through American high schools, because the vibe is often just kind of like it was a war, a lot of bad, a lot of people were very traumatized, a lot of awful things happened, but it's also like the American kind of story that is, kind of like the least common denominator. So it's not that everybody believes this, but if we don't examine it and we just hear it referred to on the news or like on the edges of conversations or whatever, it's just kind of a war that happened and then stopped and then we left. And I remember like a British podcaster in particular that I listened to who just thought that was absolutely hilarious, because she was like, well, you didn't leave, you guys lost. And I think that's absolutely true, but definitely wasn't 3, 4, 5 the understanding that I came away with my high school diploma. I would at least, I don't think I would have claimed to know. Well, I don't know, I'm pretty pompous. I might have claimed to know, but definitely would have claimed that we won or that we accomplished what we wanted to, but I would at least have wanted to say that like it's complicated, like I don't really understand. So it's complicated, and maybe we did, maybe who knows. But anyway, we lost. And we don't like to think of that. But anyway, so again, that's kind of a big, an example, a symptom that can be observed from outside. That's pretty, that can be seen because it's more obvious and glaring. But I think we do really need to, what I've been thinking about recently is how a lot of us want to talk about, like these protests. I've seen a lot of people talking about, or not a lot, I don't know. It feels, I feel certain things strongly when I see them online, and it feels like a lot of people are saying them, but maybe they're not. But, the people saying that like protests don't do anything. We need to be organizing. But even though, organizing is kind of, also can be kind of vague, like we don't always know exactly what that means. There is a lot of evidence, especially in places outside the US and in more focused protests and boycotts, that protests really can work. But there's also a lot of evidence that like these big kind of very vague protests can be like the Women's March. I went to the Women's March in whatever that was, 2017, and that got huge turnout all over the US. Didn't really do anything. You know, we kind of all showed up and went, yeah, wow, there's a lot of us. But we didn't, you know, there wasn't a strong enough, like it was a big enough tent that we weren't going in any one direction, I guess, kind of. Yeah. So I don't know, I'm kind of talking around a big area, but I'll just talk a little bit about my other experiences with protests. When I went to the Women's March in 2017, January 2017, I was living in Indiana, so I went with a couple of friends, or a friend and her husband drove me. I had also gone to a few, at least one, I think 2 or 3 Black Lives Matter protests in Indiana. I was in Bloomington. So the Women's March, we went to Indianapolis. But the Black Lives Matter protests that I was a part of were also like more on kind of the liberal rather than leftist or anarchist end, where they, like one of them, we marched from down kind of the main campus street to the courthouse, the city courthouse. Yes, to downtown, and there were some speakers and things, which is something. It's good, and you know, we had a lot of people, you know, in southern Indiana showing up and blocking the street off for a few blocks and holding up our signs saying Black Lives Matter. So that's something. But it was also something where, you know, they had permits beforehand from the police, which, if you listen to people on the more anarchist side of things, makes it not really a protest at all because we had permission to be there. So it's just kind of a parade. Which, yeah, and I think that perspective has merit, obviously. Another protest I went to in Bloomington, I think would have been in 2016, so it was against the Dakota Access Pipeline. While the protests, or the big gathering and protest at Standing Rock was happening, I'm not sure at one point within the Standing Rock timeline. Anyway, so that was a thing that was organized by people more on the anarchist end, and a dear friend came with me. Neither of us were completely sure what to expect. I had showed up to, you know, a few of the more paradey protests. This was not one of those. So we actually blocked one of the busier streets in Bloomington, at least one direction of traffic, and then stood and surrounded a gas station. All the driveways, all the exits and entrances for a gas station, which, you know, to protest this gas pipeline, and the use of fossil fuels, which we've known for, you know, much longer than 2016, like, you know, decades, has been a huge problem and worth protesting. So that was much scarier, also because I wasn't sure what I was getting into. I'd seen information about it and was feeling like protests were important. Yeah, but that felt much more like doing something. And a thing that I also always think of with that one was it was well organized. Like, I was just a person who showed up. I was not part of the organizers. But when we were walking back, you know, so we're blocking the other end of traffic with our signs and chanting, and people honking at us. Some people were yelling things of support in cars, stopped or going the other way. Many people were extremely pissed off, which, again, scary, but also that's what, you know, if you're going to be protesting, the disruption is kind of part of not even the goal, but like the way that anything gets done. Like, you need people to notice. You need to be in people's way. Anyway, but they were well organized. So there was a car that came up behind us who trying to drive through the side of the street that we were on. And I think the driver was like yelling out of his window. So when the people in the organizing group ran back and talked to him, and he said he was trying to drive his kid to the hospital. So, that person ran up to the front, the person, one of the leaders, leading the group, not like, we weren't, I don't know the names of most of the people were there, but one of the folks up there said, okay, we need to let this car through. This guy's trying to get his kid to the hospital. So we parted long enough for that car to get through, and then came back together and continued blocking traffic. So it was very important, it was very important to that level of protest that we're trying to disrupt it was like 5 o'clock. So when everybody's trying to get home, we're trying to disrupt people's day, make people understand how upset, like how unacceptable the Dakota Access Pipeline was, and our dependence on fossil fuel and generally. But it's very important. It's not just that our goal in that kind of thing is not to hurt anyone. It's just we need to be careful that we don't hurt, our fellow working class folks. So anyway, that kind of spectrum from what felt like kind of a Black Lives Matter parade in Bloomington to this protest against fossil fuel and the Dakota Access Pipeline are kind of my two kind of a couple of learning examples for me of what protests can feel like and what it feels like to be, doing things. But another thing that I think is extremely important, and kind of what I'm trying to unpack, thinking about this propaganda we've all grown up in, is that, like, I think it's important to recognize that if we just all have a big gathering, like the Women's Day, and potentially these current hands-off protests could end up where it just feels like we all show up to show that we're unhappy, and we are impressed at how many people there are, and then we go home. Maybe it's cathartic, but we don't actually accomplish anything necessarily. So I think it's so tricky and insidious, because I really feel strongly that one of the most valuable things we can be building right now is our feelings of connection and hope. And I think those are both things that you can build at those kinds of protests. Because right now, I think many people feel like, we don't know what to do, partially because, it's extremely hard. Like, you need money to be alive. A lot of things are stressful. Just being aware of the world right now is extremely stressful, and you have to have time and money and energy and whatever to get out and do anything. And also because whatever you do right now, you are sure to see, if you're on social media at all, like paying attention to political stuff, you are sure to see people telling you that whatever you're doing is worthless and stupid, and there are other ways that are better. And the fact that I'm seeing those things, I would say, is partially a matter of, maybe I could curate who I'm following a bit better. I think we do have to, or it's helpful when we can be thoughtful about that and be, I follow people who make me feel bad, I guess, if I can learn from them. So there are people who are more anarchists. There are people in groups that are more oppressed than I am, Black people, Indigenous people, trans people, especially trans women right now. And they might say things, that make me feel bad. And that's partially, that bad feeling is partially like a result of this kind of system, this oppressive system, this system of trauma that we're all living in, where you just kind of when and feel like anybody who's interested in watching my YouTube channel is probably kind of familiar with those moments where, you just see something that isn't the way you thought it was, or doesn't feel the same to you as it does for everyone else, or something you realize you're just wrong about, and it can be painful. And I think it's a big mistake to attribute that pain, like, to the activists and educators and members of marginalized communities that are saying things that make us feel it, right? That pain is a symptom of this larger shitty system that we're all in. And yeah. But I try not to. So anyway, so that can make it harder for me to curate to some extent, like to decide when someone is worth following, because someone isn't worth following or worth listening to, like following online, not yeah, following sounds different when you're not talking about the internet, because you can train yourself too far in any one direction, especially if you're just relying on emotions and not breaking down what those emotions are coming from or what they mean. Because like I've definitely had can have found myself, especially when I'm not doing as well mentally, emotionally, tending towards following or taking in a lot of media that just makes me feel bad about myself, and not recognizing that it's doing that, like that's the main impact. And it's not like it's teaching me important things that also give me some bad feelings, because that's kind of inevitable, but just gravitate towards things that just make me feel worse about myself or about the world or whatever. So yeah, so trying to understand what to do in this, in the midst of this, I just like abusive system, like, yeah, I don't know. One of the better ways that I have found to understand America as a country, or most, especially belief, like institutions that have any feeling of belief or loyalty attached to them, is to think about them as families, and particularly as dysfunctional families, because that's something in my own life that I have a lot of experience with, and also have a lot of experience analyzing and healing from. So that's helpful to me. But I guess where I am right now is I can see so many of the things that are, or I can feel kind of these traumatic walls that I'm running into, and I'm not sure what's on the other side of them. Or maybe, walls is maybe too strong, but these like areas of scar tissue where I don't think I have like huge, we all have blind spots, but I don't think I have like huge areas of the world blocked off. Potentially I do, but what I'm trying to say is I think it's more like I have these areas of scar tissue or wounds that I'm running into, and I don't know what it would feel like to move freely. And I don't know if any particular action is going to be helping me to heal and like regain these like emotional or political abilities or functions or connections that we probably that humans probably have had for a lot of our history, because the world we're living in right now is very strange and very dysfunctional, and dysfunctional on scales that are unprecedented, right? I don't know that certainly there have always been unhealthy human societies, and possibly every human society has always been at least a little unhealthy. I don't know. But anyway, what I'm trying to work on right now is how to express that feeling where I know that just building hope and connection, just getting out there with big groups of people who feel similarly, similarly enough to all stand together is really important and really positive, and like helping us build maybe some of these like atrophied community muscles that we all need to be using. But also these like toothless protests that can be just kind of cathartic but not accomplish anything, let us all, and like I've been seeing a lot of extremely constructive criticism, especially from Black activists online. I think Allie Henny is one, talking about, are you all just like going out to have a party and then coming home? Because that's kind of what it sounds like from the people who are there. Like, what were you trying to do, and why aren't, and another important point is, why aren't the cops unhappy with us? Because like any meaningful protest, the Dakota Access Pipeline protest I went to, all the more impactful Black Lives Matter protests, like if they know you're showing up for that, cops are mad. And I think cops being mad is a good metric of whether or not your protest or just any disruptive action is effective. So these large protests, where nobody's having any trouble, and something, this is Allie Henny, I'm paraphrasing what I remember from her saying, that no one's having trouble getting there on roads aren't blocked, no one's having trouble on public transit, like, anyway, clearly the cops are just fine with people showing up because they don't expect anything to come from it. Because similar protests in the past, I think it was the March for Science, I didn't go to. Women's March I did. Past marches, past protests like this haven't necessarily done anything. But that doesn't mean that these can't, right? There's another one in 2 weeks. I didn't go to the one on Saturday. I might go to the one in 2 weeks. And just, if we can grab on to any pieces of community, any concrete action, like, not that you have to go and find a bunch of people you're going to definitely meet up with, but if there's any concrete action that you can take or that you can put energy into from that, even if it's extremely small, because we do, a lot of us, myself included, need to just keep learning, keep using those community muscles. And because a lot of the folks who have been doing that, like a lot of people, people get burned out because we just don't know how to support each other. We don't know how to support, especially through making mistakes, which I think is also part of this propaganda that we've all been seeped in. And that's a thing that an FD Signifier video made me think about recently. He wasn't talking about this specifically, but kind of a more specific, doesn't matter, but he was saying insightful things. But just that even like in popular culture, or like I'm rereading Agatha Christie right now, and socialists, there's often, especially in her later books, she wrote up to the 70s, there's often a young socialist who's either like really shady or annoying or just really stupid and gets themselves killed. But the reason I've been thinking about this, and one of the points FD Signifier was making, was about even like TV shows from the 90s would always have like provided us and like programmed in these responses where, if someone says something leftist or that sounds socialist, we all want to attack. Like, we have these parts of our brains that are trained to attack and be like, well, has that fixed every problem? Or, well, have you already accomplished that? Or, well, like, why haven't you solved, like, or the thing about, like, why are you using an iPhone if you don't like capitalism? Which is, often when it gets specific enough, we can refute. It's easy to refute those things because, like that Ursula K. Le Guin quote talking about how, capitalism seems untoppable. I don't remember, that was not her word, but it seems like inescapable. But the divine right of kings must have as well. And obviously, we don't live under medieval European monarchy anymore. Like these huge system level changes can happen. So I don't know. I just want us all to have a lot of compassion for ourselves and others, and to keep listening to the things that make us uncomfortable, especially when you can feel that there's something to be learned there, because we're all trying our best, and it's really hard, and I feel like we're fighting with parts of ourselves that we don't know how to name a lot of the time, which can make it just very painful to interact and to try to bring those parts, or hopeful parts of ourselves too, maybe, that we can't name. But it makes it very scary to try and put those parts of ourselves out where other people can see them. So I don't know. I guess if you're trying, I'm proud of you, and I think you should keep going. And also remember that activism or positive change might have uncomfortable elements, make you feel uncomfortable, but that should not be the main thing it does. I guess we all have permission to take care of ourselves. From my point of view, we all have permission to take care of ourselves and to take breaks, set things down for a while if we need to, just not to completely reject or abandon them. If I won't keep going, but keep healing yourself, keep finding ways to heal ourselves as part of society. Okay, I really don't know what I'm talking about now, so I'm gonna go. But things are hard, I guess, and I'm proud of you. So carry on. Okay, bye-bye.